Hey, I'm Gopola.
And I'm Darian.
So, we want to talk about the things we did this week for our game.
Yeah, so this week we got some of the core gameplay systems working, as well as some UI elements and some 3D models in the making.
But without further ado, let's get right into it. Over to you, Darian.
Thanks! So what we got here, let me fix the camera a bit. What we got here is a little bit of 2D section of gameplay that we worked on a little bit before. But I have also been working on some text dialogue. So I want to showcase kind of the 2D section of gameplay here that we have. Right now, this is a test zone, so it doesn't make too much sense. The camera follows you, but you can walk out into the void. It's a little strange, but we're just testing it, and we're thinking that this is along the style that we want to be using. 2D pixel art, top-down. We might change it slightly to be a little bit less detailed on the pixel art style. But all things considered, we have walking, we have spriting, we have animation working for this section, and we can continue to do so. Now you might be wondering, hey, what is this floating text box right here, right? Especially since it doesn't follow the screen. Well, that is a good question. It should follow the screen. We just haven't gotten there yet. But what it does do is it lets me test the dialog box we've been working on. So in cases where someone's talking to the player, or the player says something back, aka you have choices, we have a little test box here, so I can make sure to implement it correctly. So what we have working now is the text, of course. Hey, this is a text, dialog text. Here's some test options. So let's say we're like, oh, I'm going to go with option 2. Let's take, you choose 2. Now normally, and I will eventually fix this, you'll have a text box, so it doesn't look like text floating in the void, and it should follow the camera so it isn't just floating in midair. But if I just redo this, and instead do choose 1. There you are, choose 1. A bunch of fun little options. Mainly just wanted to showcase, hey, we got dialogue working. You can fill that in with whatever you want. We'll make it aesthetically pleasing. And overall, 2D gameplay is kind of exactly how we want it to be. Alright, next up, we have the 3D models I've been working on. Right now they're just models. You'll see some different colors, but that is just the program spriting them a certain way. I don't actually know how it chooses its colors, but it does. So this one looks like it has skin with a green shirt on. I don't know why. Just kind of ended up that way. But we're trying to make something scary. When it looks like this, it's not so scary. But so far, we have him modeled. He's rigged a little weird. I had to fix that. But right now, like, you know, if I tried to move his arm, it's a little bit janky, but hey, it works. So in this case, these need put in their own layers so we can animate it. But for now, we've got a model working. We'll fix up some kinks in it real quick in a bit after this video. But what we do have as well is, hey, what's that? It's the body of a bird. He's not quite a bird yet. He's developing. But if you look at the reference we have, hey, you can kind of see where it's coming from. Now the tail, please don't judge me, the tail is not done. Right now it looks like the bird's trying to wear a cape and is doing so in, I don't know, it's a fashion statement. It's not bad, it's not wrong, I can't say it's wrong. But yeah, this bird, however, I was smart and from the beginning made sure to rig it a little bit more properly. So you can move his legs from that angle. If you open this up a little bit, you can move his legs from his knee. Makes it so much nicer for animating. Should have done that when making the scary looking dog creature before, but yeah, just kind of showing off what we're working on. Hopes for next week, in my case, is to finish up this bird model, fix the other model of the dog, and sprite both of them. What's nice about this program is you can kind of just make a texture. It's just say you can make it whatever you want. And la la la, we're doing the texture of the legs right now. What's nice about that is I can be like, hey, look at this little tiny spot over here. And then if I wanted to, I could literally paint on top of it. Now I'd have to go into paint mode, but hey, look, white. It's super nice, it's super easy, and it's super not done yet. So that is future to come, along with the dialogue being actually following the player. Having a text box, and maybe a special little surprise. But that's for you guys to find out watching what I do next week.
As far as me goes, I've had a pretty busy week. I had to make sure light detection works, have a system in place so that the game could know when the player was within a light source zone, when the player is safe, and when the player is outside of one. I had to have the orb working, the orb that the player pulls out and puts away, and it gives off a light source that is safe, but also is on a limited timer that you have to recharge, meaning I also had to have a way to recharge the orb in game. And I also had to have the firework box done so that it would be able to be pushed by the player and also be able to be reset when it was out of the light, because that's the basis of our main puzzle in night one. So, my main goal at the start of the week was to work on the orb. Um, what has to happen in order for the orb to work the way we want it to is that we have an orb that the player can pick up off the ground. Once you pick it up, the orb gives off an amount of light, and that light diminishes over time. Once the light reaches zero, um, it is no longer considered a light source, and the player loses their safety net. And the only way to bring the light back is to recharge it at a recharging station, or in our case, the bird, which will be implemented for the first night. So, um, so what I did for that is I started out by making a new scene for an orb, which is just this. For now, it's just a collision shaped 3D in the shape of an orb. And under this orb, I have a few things going for it. First off, in this scene, I've got a light timer, and this is the main timer that we use to have the orb tick down over time, have it diminish in light. We have a omnidirectional light because we actually need the light that it's giving off, and obviously we have the safe zone. This is the other system I had to make that treats this orb, the light that this orb gives off, as a place that signals that the player is safe in when the orb is active. So how I got this working, it took a little bit of trial and error to make work. This is not going to be the final implementation in the game, but we needed something to work for right now so we can actually finish script 1. So essentially the player has a raycast, and when that raycast collides with orb pickup, which I have a separate item that is in the overworld, that is the orbs that you'll see in the overworld, and this is a separate scene. Um, when a player's raycast is colliding with that orb pickup, it'll run interact and have pickup orbs function start playing. So what interact is on orb pickup is that it just, for now, for our console, prints you interacted and queues free, which means the object is deleted from the scene. And what this essentially accomplishes is that when I go over to this orb in the overworld, I press interact with it, and it should queue free. Now you see a little spoiler for the things I did after that. The pickup orb function essentially allows it so that the items used, which is in a singleton, goes up to 1, and the timer for the light actually starts because the light needs to tick down. It was a lot of trial and error to kind of get this to work the way we want it to, but essentially what's happening is that the light timer is stopped at the beginning of the scene in the on ready in the player, and once it's picked up for the first time, um, and items use orb is set to 1 because of the function, um, the orb will be shown. We don't have an animation for it, so technically the orb is always on the player, like on the player in front of the camera of the player, and it's just hidden when it's not used, and it's the node itself is set to show when it's used. And we can figure out a way to make it so it's a bit more dynamic for the future, but for now, this is kind of the way we have it working, where when you click use, which is left click, the orb is set to show, and use orb will go to 1, and it'll print used for the console. And when you press it again, it'll hide it, which is essentially putting it away. And I have another if else statement here that says when it's visible, the light timer will continue, and if it is not visible, the light timer will be paused. So that's how we have a timer that's going down while the orb is being used. How this was tied to the actual light in the scene going down is actually happening in the orb script. Here we have a variable I made called orb over time, which is remapping the amount of time that the light timer, the timer itself, has left from 0 to the amount of time to 0.5 to 1. And this is important because omnidirectional lights actually have a property called energy, which is essentially the amount of life, the intensity of the light that the light gives off. So by mapping the property light energy to the time left, it is able to be diminished over time, as you can see here. Once I pick up the orb, I can put it away, pick it up as intended, and you can see the color slowly start to diminish over time, and the circle of light beneath me goes away. And now it's fully out, and you can see that it stopped being a light source, and I'm getting all the nopes in the corner of the screen, meaning I'm no longer safe here. So yes, um, that's how we got that working. After that, a big thing I had to figure out is getting the player light detection system to work. At first, I wanted to use area 3Ds and like area collisions to make that work. So I made the safe zone, I gave it a collision space, and I was trying to have on body entered effects to kind of see how it would start working. But I realized that's not going to work because the only real signals that on body entered and stuff like that uses is, or the only real signals that Area 3D uses is on body entered and on body exited. It can only really check when something enters and when something exits. It can't actively update while something is colliding. So after many hours of trying to get Area 3D to work, I eventually realized that that's just not the nature of that node. And I found that shape casts, which are essentially raycasts but in a shape, can kind of help us do the same thing in a different way. At first, I had a shape cast on the safe zone, and it wasn't really working out the way we had it. But after shifting it over to the player code, where as I showed you before, the player has a shape cast that is the player zone, which is slightly bigger than their actual mesh, which is this pill shaped thing. We have it set in the code that when this player zone, the shapecast, is colliding, it'll check if the thing that it is colliding with is in light sources, which it has to be because I have it so that the player zone is only masking layer 3. And the only things that are on layer 3 are the things that have the safe zone scene, which are the light sources. So it's checking for light sources on layer 3. So it'll check if it's in the group light sources. And if it is, it'll return a variable saying that safe is true, that the player is safe. It'll stop the sleep timer. This is the timer that starts going when that starts ticking down when you're not in the light, essentially. So if you're not in the light for too long, you will die. So we have a sleep timer that takes care of that, which is currently set to 10 seconds. So spending 10 seconds outside of the line, so spending 10 seconds outside of the line means you die. So yeah, essentially what's going on is the shapecast is checking when it is colliding with anything, and it gets the collider of the thing it is colliding with. And the only things that it can get are the only things that it can check for are things that are light sources, because I have the shapecast set to mask collision mask 3, which means it can only check things that are on layer 3. And the only thing I have on layer 3 are the area 3D node, that is the safe zone, that's masking layer 3. So I have it set to that, and I have collide with on areas only, not bodies, to make sure that it can only collide with the area 3D node, and the only thing that we're using it for is the light zone. So it's essentially checking if we are colliding with the light sources, and if we are, player state that safe is set to true. We are safe. And if the player is not colliding with the light source, in the else statement here, you can see that player state is set to false, which means the player is not safe. And you can also see underneath that there is a time check and a sleep timer starting in that else statement. Essentially, how we wanted light detection to work in our game is that we wanted it so that if the player is outside the light for too long, then they sleep and end up skipping a section of the game. Since we don't have any other scenes to skip to, for now, the way I have it implemented is that at the end of the timer, the player will essentially die and the game will quit out. And how that's working is with another timer that's under the player, which is set to 15 seconds, that starts it when the player is outside of that scene. And with all that being said, light detection should be working as we want, where it says in the console, as you can see down there, super safe, that we are safe. If I go out of the light, it says nope, which means we are not safe. And if I stay out of the light for too long, then the game quits, as you saw right there. And the other things I did this week is I made a quick model for a screwdriver here, which is essentially what the player will use to try to escape during the escape section of the first night. And I had to figure out the firework box, which is essentially a box that the player can push around during the puzzle section that vanishes if it's not in the light. So the player essentially has to juggle recharging their orb in order to make sure that the box is always in the light and they push it all the way towards the window to blow it open and escape. And the way I got that working is essentially by using global position. At the start, it checks the global position, and it's essentially using the same code that the player was using to detect light collision to detect light sources. If the box is not in that light source, it will be reset to its original position that it took at the start of the scene. So seeing this in action, we get that's the box over there. That's the firework box where I can push it as a player. I can push it around, and right now there's a light source, which is my orb, and once it runs out, it got reset to its original position. And happens the same way. If I push it out of the light source here, it gets reset back. And that's how we wanted it functioning in the puzzle. So that's kind of what we worked on this week. We made a lot of progress, and I'm really proud of how the game's coming along so far. Looking ahead, I think this next week is really when we start putting scenes together. We're starting with the puzzle scene, which is what I was readying most of the game systems for, and hopefully, we make something pretty awesome. I'm excited with what we're doing so far. So yeah,
Thanks for watching.
bye bye.